My name is Lyndon Vogt. I'm the manager of the Central Platte Natural Resource District that's located here in Grand Island. And Conservation Nebraska asked me to do a presentation about water quality in central Nebraska and kind of how we manage our water and some of our programs. So I got about a 30-minute presentation that kind of runs through a lot of that kind of stuff, and then talks about where we've been, where we're going, and what our water quality is. So bear with me here. I'm going to use my mouse to scroll through my slides, I think. Well, I was, and it worked a minute ago, and now it's not. All right. So just a quick, Nebraska has 23 natural resource districts. We're political subdivisions of the state of Nebraska. We're set up on watershed boundaries, not political boundaries, which makes it very nice when we're working. We do a lot of flood control, erosion, flood control, water quality, water quantity. Of course, we're most known for planting trees. That's what we kind of started with in 1972. So that's what most people think of us as, I think. But we've went well beyond that as far as the projects we do. We spend quite a bit of time and money on flood control projects within our districts as well, not only water quality. So you can see the Central Platte. I guess I don't have a pointer, but the Central Platte sits right here in the center part of the state, runs along the Platte River. You'll see that slide a lot of time, that map a lot of times as we run through here. So we run from just south of Columbus to Gothenburg. So our district's mission is to wisely conserve, manage, and enhance the water, soil, range, wildlife, and forest resources within the district for the benefit of all. And that mission is set by our board of directors. We are run by an elected board. All of the NRDs have elected boards. I believe the smallest board is it's either 5 or 7 directors, and the largest is 21. And it's up to each district to set their board size. So if our board decided that they thought 21 was too many and they wanted to go to 19 or 17, they could do that as a vote of their board. But we've been at 21 now for 50 years, I guess. So we have 10 sub-districts. All of our directors are elected by sub-district, 2 per sub-district and 1 at large. Our total population of our NRD is 144,000, almost 145,000. About 25,000 of them are rural, and about 120,000 of them are actually considered urban. So each sub-district has about 14,000 people in them. So we have them 10 sub-districts broke up fairly evenly for voting purposes. Our directors serve a 4-year term. They have to refile to stay on our board for every 4 years. And as I said, they set our policies, our programs, and our priorities. We're a heavily irrigated district. We have 2.1 million acres in our entire NRD. 1 million, actually slightly over 1 million of them are irrigated. 937,000 of them are irrigated with groundwater wells. We have about 75,000 that are considered commingled, so they have a surface water and a groundwater source. And we have about 22 or 3,000 that are just surface water. So we do have some surface water acres in the Dawson County and in Buffalo County. Our river systems, the Platte River is about 205 miles long in our district. And then we actually break out the north channel of the Platte, which is another 50 miles. And the Wood River is a major drainage in our district too, which is about 173 miles long through our district. So our biggest concerns is nitrates in our drinking water. So our sources of nitrogen, we don't have, nitrogen is naturally occurring. We normally say if it's below 3.5 parts per million, it very well could be naturally occurring. If it's over that, it very well could be that it is being increased by something that's being introduced to the environment. So our sources of nitrogen, our main sources are nitrogen fertilizer, animal waste, human waste. EPA many years ago set the regulatory limit at 10 parts per million for drinking water. And the greatest exposure, our greatest area of concerns are actually in our ag areas where people are drinking out of their private wells. Most of our all of our municipalities are required to test their wells on a regular basis. So, and they're required to treat it or keep it below that 10. But in our agriculture areas where we have domestic wells, that's not the case. So we do encourage people to always test their wells to make sure that their drinking water is below that 10 parts per million. That regulatory limit, the maximum contamination level of 10 parts per million, was set quite a while ago, and it was actually set based on infants. And they were really just looking at blue baby syndrome, not really no other diseases, and that's where that 10 parts per million came from. We know based on some studies that the University of Nebraska Med Center have put out in the last few years that it's also linked to quite a few other adverse health effects. Some of the strongest ones you see there, the colorectal cancer, thyroid disease, pediatric brain cancer, and these are all from the university, the Med Center is who's putting this information out, and they've released a lot of this information just within the last 18 months to 24 months about nitrates in your drinking water. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our groundwater management plan and how we address that. So we have a water quality management plan that resulted in a nitrogen management program. So I'll visit a little bit about our irrigation sampling program, our on-farm research program, the Vado sampling that we've done, domestic sampling, and a kimmigation program that the NRD has all done, all kind of as a part of our management plan. Our original management plan was written in 1985. It was actually approved in 1987, and it was the very first management plan in the state of Nebraska for groundwater quality and quantity. We actually just updated it as of July 1st, 2023. We did it was updated, we had some slight revisions to it in the late 90s, and then we did a kind of a rewrite and update of it over the last 2 years. It just took effect July 1st of that management plan. We enforce that plan through our rules and regulations, and we have a monitoring program and an education program also that I'll talk just a little bit about tonight. So our rules and regs are set on parts per million. So the areas of our phase 1 is 0 to 7.5 parts per million of nitrates. Our phase 2 is 7.5 to 10, and our phase 3 is over 10. We do have a phase 4 area that we have not implemented yet, but it's an area where we can work with individuals where the nitrate levels are maybe continue to increase instead of decrease in our district, where we could work with individuals rather than saying we're going to have 6 or 8 townships that we work with. So that is something that we're exploring right now, but we have not taken that step yet. So this just kind of, I guess it's really hard to see the color on that screen. On mine it shows really good, but so our phase 1 acres, we have about 1.4 million acres are in phase 1, meaning our nitrates are below the 7.5 parts per million. We have about 420,000 acres in phase 2 and 319,000 in phase 3. And I'm going to touch on all of them just a little bit more. So our phase 1 rules, the only thing we have as a rule in our phase 1 is we always offer educational classes to all of our producers, but we also do not allow fall application of fertilizer on sandy soils. That's where we see some of our biggest losses of our nitrates getting into our groundwater is in sandy soils. And so that's really our only regulation in phase 1. We get to phase 2 then, them 423,000 acres are between the 7.6 and the 10. I apologize, that yellow don't show up very good. So this area is kind of along the river. It's in the low-lying areas of our district, most of it is, but so when you get to phase 2, we have not only do we prohibit nitrogen on sandy soils, we don't allow it on any soils until after November 1st, till the weather starts kind of cooling down and we're not seeing that mineralization of that nitrogen after they put it on. And they must go through an educational or a nitrogen certification program every 4 years. So, and we have about 850 producers that are in our phase 2 and 3 programs that participate in these programs. So, also in phase 2, we require an annual report that's due March 31st every year. So they have to give us a report on every field in our phase 2 and 3 areas. So we really, what this report, kind of the bottom line of the report is to get to help them determine their nitrogen need. So we're looking at expected yield, all of their nitrogen credits being either from a crop or alfalfa or soybeans, if they were planted there last year, if there's manure involved, soil samples, because there's always residual nitrogen in your soil after a crop, and water sampling. So all of that is required as a part of our crop report form. So as our producers go through there and put in, so when they fill that out in March, they're giving us all of their application from the previous year and their yield, and then they're giving us their expected yield this year, and they're showing us what they applied for nutrients, what the UNL recommended rate was, and what they actually applied. And then so we can, I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but then we can go back and actually kind of compare how they did on the year based on how they thought they were going to do. And sometimes Mother Nature plays a big role in that with hail and wind, but in a large part of our district, it gives us a pretty good idea of what's going on. We do require their lab reports, so they have to send their soil samples and their water samples and to the lab, and we get a copy of all of them reports from the labs. So phase 3, all the crop report forms are also required in our phase 3 program. The only thing we have is we do not allow any nitrogen fertilizer to be applied in the fall. Everything has to be after March 1st. And if they have to split apply, if they're putting on more than 50% of the required nitrogen up front, they have to split apply that. And if they're putting on over 80 pounds, they have to use an inhibitor to keep that from breaking down as fast. So that kind of covers our phase 2 and 3 regulations. I ran through them pretty fast. I'm happy to answer any questions after we're done. So phase 4, I talked about that. It's areas where our nitrates are not declining. So we would still require the crop report form. Currently it says that we will work with them and look at their last 5 years yields, average them, and give them another 5%. And that's actually a UNL recommendation. That's what they recommend all producers do on corn yields, is look at their last 5 years plus 5. And that's the yield they should be shooting for, should be fertilizing for. So in this, if they get to a phase 4, their nitrogen application could not exceed our district recommendation. Our district recommendation is UNL's recommendation. And we would work with them individuals one-on-one to help them accomplish this. We also have a kimmigation program. I'm going pretty fast through some of this stuff, but we have a kimmigation program that's actually, it's in Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy's program, but the NRDs do all the inspections. So a lot of people don't understand what the kimmigation is, and it's actually just the process of putting on chemicals or nutrients through your irrigation pivot, through your system. We actually encourage people to do that. We like to see that done because most people that do this split apply. So they're not putting on 150 pounds up front. We get a hailstorm and it's nothing, it's eventually gonna leak into our groundwater, or leach into our groundwater. Or with a split application, they're maybe putting it on 3 or 4 times, so they're spoon feeding it. It's keeping that nitrogen in the root zone. And so we encourage people to kimmigate. As you can see, we have about 2,100 kimmigation permits in our district annually, and we try to inspect them on about a 3-year rotation. So we do about 800 inspections a year. And when we're going out there, we're really just inspecting to make sure that when they're injecting it, their injection valve works, and there's a slam valve in there that does not allow any water to go back down that well if the pivot would shut off while they're injecting them chemicals. And so really what we're looking at is to make sure nothing can go back down the well if that pivot shuts off or if there's an issue with it. And we're in the process of doing that right now. We have 3 people, that's pretty much what they're doing every day most of the summers, them 800 inspections. So when we talk about leaching of nitrates, there's 2 components of it, and I didn't touch on this on the crop report forms. So leaching has 2 components. It's not only the fertilizer that's applied, but it's the water that's applied too. I said, if we get it, if you're putting 150, 200 pounds on up front and you get a hailstorm or we get a heavy rain, you're losing that. It's going down into the groundwater. So it can, You don't necessarily have to get a heavy rain too. You can do the same thing by over-fertilizing or over-watering with your pivots. So in them crop report forms, we do require our producers to actually report approximately how much water they pump. We don't require meters on their wells, but most of them know fairly close to what their well's pumping per minute, and they all have gallon or timers on them or hour meters on them. So it's not an exact number, but it's fairly close to give us some idea of what they're pumping and kind of how they compare to everybody else. So I said we had over 1 million irrigated acres. We have 18,000 registered irrigation wells in our district on them 850 producers. So we have a lot of irrigation wells in our district. So our quality program, so them crop reports amount to over 4,600 reports every year that we're getting in. Up until about 6 years ago, we got them in a paper format, and we had one employee that entered all of that data on an annual basis. About 6 years ago, we went to an online reporting form. We won't even accept a paper form anymore. It has to be done online. And if you don't have a computer or you're having trouble with yours, you can come into our office here in Grand Island, and we have an employee that will sit down with you and enter all your data if you bring it in for you to put in here, but we will not accept a paper copy anymore. So we not only get nitrate results from them 4,600 reports, we're also doing about another 1,000 wells a year that we're, or 1,000 wells that we're taking samples out of as well. And we're taking them 1,000 wells are also on a 3-year rotation, and I'll get into that a little bit more too later. But so we have a lot of data when it comes to water quality, and our water quantity program too. We have about 116 active monitoring wells that we're taking measurements in for water quantity, meaning we're measuring from the land surface to the water table. So we know what's happening with our aquifer, if we're losing or gaining in that aquifer. So we're always looking at that too. The 116 active monitoring wells, we also measure, and besides them, we measure almost another 350 to 400 wells. So total of between 450 wells every year we're measuring for spring and fall for groundwater levels. We don't use our fall measurements for any management decisions. Our fall measurements give us a pretty good idea of how hard that aquifer was pumped and its ability to recover. We use our spring measurements. Our spring measurements give us, by then the cone of depressions have recovered, the pressure and the water in the aquifer is stabilized, and it gives us a pretty good idea of where we're at from spring to spring, and that's what we're actually looking for. But we do measure them well spring and fall. I talked a little bit about a Vado program too. So the Vado zone is the area below the root zone and above the water table. So it's kind of the area of no return. So if you have your nitrates leach below that root zone, it's in that Vado zone until it hits the water table. And so when I talk Vado zone, in the 1990s, we went to 27 different sites in our district and did Vado samples. And them varied in depth of groundwater tremendously. I'm sure we had some that were probably 15, 20 feet to groundwater, and we probably had some that were 150 or 200 feet to groundwater within our district. But we wanted to have some idea of what was in that Vado zone, because what's in that Vado zone is what is going to get into our groundwater eventually. It can only go one direction, and it goes down. And we went back we actually started that study, I think, in 18 or 19 and wrapped it up in 21. We went back to them exact same sites so we could get an idea of how fast the nitrates were going down. So when we did them cores in 21, if we had a spike one year where the nitrates were pretty high, even though it was almost 30 years later, you could see where that spike had moved down in the profile. So we knew how far the nitrates had moved down in 30 years. So it gave us a pretty good idea of how fast things were moving through the system. And as it says over here, on average, depending on soil type, in our district, it moves about 1 foot to 2.5 foot a year, depending on soil type. So if it's a heavier clay soil, it's moving quite a bit slower. If it's a sandier gravel soil, it's moving quite a bit faster. What we did see is after our 90s, after the cores we did in the 90s, we had about a 10% reduction in nitrates in our Vado zone after that 1990 level. So our producers were doing a little bit better. But in our phase 2 areas, we had about 2,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre in that zone, in the Vado zone. So there's a tremendous amount of nitrogen or nutrients that are coming into our water, and the nice thing about it is where we have 18,000 irrigation wells, we have the ability to pull it out as long as we don't add to it. We have our corn will use that nitrate, our crops will use that, our soybean, whatever, alfalfa, any crop we grow is going to use that if we pump it out and put it on it. We just can't keep adding to it, and that's kind of our goal. We've met with some officials from Iowa a few years ago, and they have the same issues Nebraska do, but they don't have irrigation wells. So how do they get that out of their groundwater? It's coming into their surface water, it's coming into their creeks and streams and down the Missouri River. So having all them irrigation wells has maybe pushed some of this down faster, but at the same time, we have the ability to use it and apply it. We just got to quit adding to it. We do a lot of producer education. We actually have a meeting tomorrow night in Wood River. But we have done a tremendous amount of demonstration plots. We have one employee that's been with us over 40 years that's done these demonstration plots. Dean Kroll is his name. Our demonstration plots are on private landowners' land. They allow us to come in, and most of our plots we were trying to show that there was no benefit to adding another 50 pounds of nitrogen. So most of the plots we did were on corn, and we're putting a strip with 50 pounds over the UNL recommendation and 50 pounds under the UNL recommendation. And on by far the majority of them plots, there was insignificant difference in yield between the 50 under and the 50 over. So we can show that to people all day long, but they still have the right to do what they want. So all of that I said was on. We appreciate the producers that allowed us to come in and do them demonstration plots on their land over all them years, because it's a lot of work for them, but it certainly helped us, and it gave us a lot of data. And a lot of the producers that we worked with changed their ways. I shouldn't say they changed their ways, but I think they become more efficient in their farming practices as a result of working with us on their own property. So, and a handful of them still work with us on some other demonstrations that we have going right now on some kimmigation trials. So we do offer a lot of cost share as well. So I guess I didn't go down that route. We have taxing authority. The NRD has the ability to tax up to 4.5 cents per $100 valuation. And maybe 20 years ago, we got another penny. So we can actually tax up to 5.5 cents. The other penny was for water quality, to address water quality concerns in our district. And that's statewide. So we can, it's a fairly small levy, but at the same time, we have a very large district, so we have a very large tax base. So that small levy allows us to do a lot of projects. But we've spent about $13 million on cost share since 1972. We were created in 1972. That's why we go back to 1972. We've just been in existence for 51 years. But we cost share on the well abandonment, flow meters, cover crops, and actually we cost share on a tremendous amount. We probably cost share on 4 times more than what's on this list, because we cost share on a lot of pasture practices too. We do burns for cedar tree control, tanks, cross fences, that type of stuff as well, wildlife habitat projects. So we just put the things on here that kind of affect our water quality and water quantity issues. So kind of our next steps and where we're going from here. I think we're trying to educate ourselves on what cost share programs are maybe working the best, and maybe focus some of our funds on fewer programs that maybe have more of a return, of a conservation return. And we're looking at improving our data management. we have a lot of data, we have a lot of data sets, and we're just in the process of kind of incorporating them and making them all talk to each other so we can actually, so we've been getting these crop report forms in since 1987. So you can imagine how many of them we have and how much data we have. And so we're just getting to where we're trying to incorporate all that data and be able to send our producers a report on an annual basis saying, here's what you said you were gonna do, here's what you did. And believe it or not, we can even go to the fact of here's what it cost you. Here's what if you would have followed the university's recommendation, here's what your cost breaker would have been, and here was what you did. You may have done better, you may have done worse. I'm not saying one way or the other, but we can show that. We have all that information. So we look at evaluating our phase areas fairly often. That's something we're gonna do here in the next few months. We have some areas in phase 2 that we know that their nitrate level is decreased a little bit and they need to go back into a phase 1. We have some areas in phase 2 that need to go into a phase 3. And we probably have a couple small areas in phase 3 that we need to be working with some producers one-on-one that should go to a 4. We are utilizing a nitrogen management dashboard that I think is my next slide. So I don't have any detailed slides on this, but about a year and a half ago, we started looking at all these crop report forms and all the data we have, and nitrogen use efficiency became kind of a buzzword about, I don't know, in the last 3 or 4 years. And everybody you talk to has a different story about their nitrogen use efficiency. So nitrogen use efficiency is just the amount of nitrogen it takes to grow a bushel of corn. So kind of 1.2 is I think it's a high number, but it's kind of a normal number that's used, is it takes 1.2 pounds of fertilizer to grow a bushel of corn. And we start talking to people about nitrogen use, and pretty soon we have people saying, well, gosh, I grow mine on 0.6. I use 0.6 pounds of nitrogen, or I use 0.8, and somebody else says I'm at 1 or 1.3. Well, we're sitting there thinking, there's no way this can be right. You know what I mean? There can't be that much variation. So what we realized is some people are talking about nitrogen applied. Some people, we don't know what they were talking about. And some people are talking about total nitrogen. So we decided to go back through them 4,600 reports for 5 years and put their total nitrogen use efficiency together. And what we found out is when you start talking total nitrogen, it's not only the nitrogen applied, but it's the nitrogen in their soil that's available to that crop. It's the nitrogen in their water based on how much they irrigated. And like I say, if they're putting on manure, they have manure tests, they know what their nitrogen in that is. And of course, if they get, I think 40 pounds for soybeans, if they had soybeans the year before, there's a legume credit there, and the same with alfalfa. So we went back and did a total, so that's why I have NUET here. It's a total nitrogen use efficiency program. And what it allowed us to do is actually show producers that thought maybe there's a 0.6, and in all reality they were at 1 or 1.1. And 1 isn't bad. If everybody in our district was at 1, I think things would look pretty good, to be quite honest with you. But so it takes about a pound of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. But the problem we have, I think, is we don't know how much we're going to irrigate, so we just use 8 inches. You know, we were able to use their crop report form where they reported what they pumped, so we knew exactly what they pumped. So it was kind of unfair to them. I mean, you know what I mean? They're guessing at the beginning of the season how much they're going to pump. We knew if they pumped 12 inches or if they pumped 4 inches. We knew, and there is not much variation. You know, so we were using actual nitrogen applied in the end, and we can show that to the producers if they come in. So we've actually got the ability now, if a producer wants to come in and see that, we have a map of our entire phase 2 and 3 area where we can click on their field and we can pull that data up. It'll show their yield, it'll show their water sample for nitrate, it'll show their soil samples the last 5 years for nitrate, and you can kind of look at it and see if maybe whoever was making the recommendation to them was maybe the one selling their fertilizer too, and was making a little higher recommendation than they should have been, or maybe he was doing a wonderful job for them too. You can see all of that in this nitrogen use dashboard. So we just kind of put that together within the last year. we've done all of that in-house. It's been a tremendous amount of work, and not for me, because I'm not smart enough to do it, but for our staff, it's been a tremendous amount of work. And it's a very interesting dashboard. I think we're just trying to get to the point of how we want to use it, or what we want to do with it next. So just kind of our water quality sampling, just to show you that we do sampling on a 3-year rotation, and in my next slide it'll make sense why we do that. So that's a pretty good representation throughout our district on how many wells we sample. So when you get to this slide, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So we test our water in 3-year increments. So we do, this is Buffalo-Dawson County line, so Gothenburg, so that's about right here. We do the western third of our district 1 year. We do the central area, which is Buffalo and Hall County the next year. And then we do the eastern part of our county the next year. So, and our nitrates vary tremendously from west to east in our district. So this is west. So our average in the western part of our district runs 4.5 parts per million. There's a reason it does. We have the influence of surface water out there. We have a number of surface water irrigated acres that kind of dilute some of the problem, and it's deeper to water out there too. So it's heavier soil. So I'm not saying they're better farmers or better producers or worse producers. I'm not saying that at all. It's just the fact that it's a different situation. They get less rain. We get a couple inches more rain, about every 40-50 miles across our district. So they're probably getting 6 or 7 inches less rain than we are here. Rain pushes it down. It's heavier soil. These are sands and gravels. These are heavier soils. And so we get in the center part of our district, in the Buffalo County area, we're sitting at about 9.5 parts per million. And you can see over all these years, it stays. We have some tremendous drought years and some very, very wet years where we don't get very many samples sometimes that we don't pay much attention to. But you can see that roller coaster over time. And then when we get to Merritt County and east from Merritt to Platte County, we see that number increase a little bit more. So across our entire district, our average right now is about 9.8 parts per million. If we take all of them wells and average them, it's about 9.8. But it's kind of deceiving that it's, that's almost our average in the center part of our district, but it's less to the west and higher to the east. So, so as I say, rainfall, soil type, depth to water, all make a difference in that. So we do our sampling on a 3-year rotation, and we're not concerned about the nitrates. Don't change that much in a year's time. You know what I mean? So over 40, well, we've got almost 50 years worth of sampling that we can go back and look at now, and we see that we see the same thing over and over. So as I say, the average in our district is right at 9.8. We probably have some in the 70s and 80s, and we have some in the 2s and 3s. So we have a lot of our wells are slowly going down, and we have a few that are slowly going up. So so if you look at that over, I think our first year on there is 74. It really hasn't changed tremendously over the last 50 years. But I think what we're seeing is some of our highs are creeping up and some of our lows are continuing to go down, and our averages staying the same. So we have to address them highs. That's the direction we're probably going to be going shortly. So we do have a domestic well. I don't have very many slides left. We have a domestic well sampling program. It's kind of scattered out throughout our district. We had one of these years ago, and then it just we kind of quit doing it, or there quit being the demand. We started doing it again. We don't put our domestic samples in with our averages. These domestic samples really look great. Our highest one's just a little over 7.5 parts per million. I mean, 8's the end of the chart there. So a lot of time, not always, but a lot of times, domestic wells are older wells, they're shallower wells, and if they're in a farmyard, there may not be livestock there today, but there might have been 70 years before today, and there could be a point source. Maybe there was a spill next to that well in their yard at one time, or they filled their sprayer next to it every time and it ran over, because who wants to stand there and watch a garden hose run into a 500-gallon sprayer all day long? And I mean, there's lots of things that can affect domestic wells. So we're happy to do domestic sampling. We kind of want to keep doing this, but in all honesty, we don't put them in our averages for what's going on in our district. Our irrigation wells kind of give us a much more general view of what's going on. We do encourage, as I said to begin with, that we would like to see everyone test their domestic wells. I believe this is my last slide. So I just talked to you about our nitrogen dashboard. We've started, 17 of the NRDs have started working with the corn board, and I believe NRCS with the federal government may join this effort. And we're looking at building a nitrogen dashboard statewide that would be free to our producers, and they would be able to do all of their crop report forms on this, access that data. On our form, they can go back, I think since they've started putting it in this format, they can go back and look at their historical data if they want to. We store all that for them. But we are working on a statewide nitrogen dashboard for our producers. And we're working with the corn board on that, and hoping that that's something we can get developed in the next 18 to 24 months to make available district-wide that would be free to all of our producers. So, oh, I lied, I got one more slide. This is just an example of kind of what that Producer Connect app would look like district-wide. It would actually, this is not a real one, but it would show their average nitrogen from soil, their organic matter, their legume credit, their irrigation credit, their manure credit, their total. It would actually even, I think it'll probably show a price per acre for yield goal too. So it shows you might be able to grow 300 bushel corn, but you may make a lot more money of growing 260 bushel corn. There is a diminishing return, you know what I mean, with the cost of sometimes of increased yields. But so we're hoping this is something we can build, and all of our producers would be able to go on there, enter their data, and it would store it for them and give them a recommendation. And that recommendation would be based on the university's nitrogen recommendation. So that is all I have, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions you have. So, yes, sir.
What would you say the health of the aquifer is as far as the level?
We're pretty lucky in the Central Platte NRD. It's hard to believe that we can have 18,000 irrigation wells pumping, and we have a dry year. We have some declines. We have a wet year. It recovers. We do have some areas. We have some areas kind of north of Kearney, up in the hills up there, that that have a sustained decline. It's not a tremendous decline yet, but it's something that is worth keeping an eye on. And then when you get to the eastern part of our district, like from Central City area on to Columbus, so the Ogallala Aquifer there is no Ogallala Aquifer there really. I mean, if there is, it's a foot or two thick. They're actually pumping from the sands and gravels that lay above the Ogallala. So that actually fluctuates tremendously in a year's time. I mean, they can pump that down pretty hard. I mean, we can see a 30-40 foot decline, and then by spring it comes back, you know. And so when I first moved here, that bothered me, I'll be honest with you, but it's kind of the way that aquifer operates out there, to be honest with you. So as far as in Nebraska as a whole, I think averages are a little bit meaningless across the state, but just because there's so much variation. I worked in Chadron for 12 years. I managed an RD out there for 12 years, and they got about 14 inches of rain, you know what I mean? And in the Alliance area, we had meters, we had allocations. They could only pump 12 inches of water, and they had decline issues. But as you get, so the 100th meridian runs right through Cozad, and so they kind of figure from Cozad this way, Our irrigation is actually just retiming rainfall. We get enough rainfall on most years. We get enough rainfall to grow a fully irrigated crop of corn on this side of Cozad, most years. And so really our irrigation is retiming rainfall is what it's doing. You get on the other side of Cozad, you don't quite get enough rainfall for that. So I think there's much more opportunity for groundwater decline out that way. And that's where you see it in the central panhandle, and then down in the Imperial area down through there. You see some decline issues, so. Yes, ma'am.
How many years do you suggest that you test your domestic wells?
I would test it every year. It costs like $6 to test it for nitrates. Now, if you want to test it for more, I would suggest, if you're in our district, that you test it for uranium every 6 or 8 years too. We are seeing some uranium hits here and there. Uranium is naturally occurring in our system, but it is, it seems like we've started some of our domestic samples. 10 or 12 of them a year, when we send them in, we'll pull a uranium sample on them too, and it's surprising. We get a hit almost every year.
Does the nitrate interact with the uranium to release it?
There has been some studies in the last couple years, some research at the university that may suggest that, but I don't know enough about it to say it does or it doesn't. But there has been some studies that suggest that the higher nitrate areas could be causing some of that uranium to precipitate out of the rock, because uranium is a heavy metal and usually lays on the bottom of the aquifer. And there is some studies going on about that, but I don't know enough about it to say yes or no. But
Do they have a limit on that uranium after they tested it?
There is a parts per million. Oh.
That's okay.
Yes, they do. There's a drinking water limit on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say it's 30 milligrams per liter, I think is what it is.
Could you bring up your domestic well sampling
Sure.
slide again? Now, in Buffalo County, I counted 11 wells that are sampled. And there's a lot of people that live there, and there are a lot of serious health implications from nitrates
Right.
in drinking water. Is 11 wells enough of a sampling program?
So we're not doing this to sample everybody's well. We're just doing it to give us an idea of what's out there.
And
We
can
are
you
in-
get enough idea, how many wells are in that area? Domestic wells?
Thousands, I'm
And you're
sure.
sampling, so you're thousands, so that is less than 1%.
So we are encouraging people to sample their wells.
Less than 0.1%.
We're not gonna tax everybody in our district so we can test your wells. You know what I'm saying, we're using tax dollars to do this. And we're encouraging people to test their own wells. We don't have the staff or the time to go out to 1,000 different homes. And you'd be surprised how many people tell us they don't want us to take a sample. We have that happen too with domestic wells.
0.1% is.
Yeah, but our goal here isn't to sample every well out there. Our goal is to let people know they need to be sampling their wells. That's our goal, yeah. And we have a great lab in Kearney, you know, that'll sample it for a reasonable price as far as for nitrates, so.
So when you get your nitrate parts per million, are you averaging that out, like quarterly sampling, or is it a grab sample like for a whole year?
So yeah, we sample once a year. It really doesn't change that much during the year. And I'll tell you what you'll see on irrigation wells, we usually do most of that sampling in late July and August, because most of the nitrates, the heaviest concentration of nitrates is right on the top of the aquifer. And that's the problem with our domestic wells. Most of them, they drill them till they hit water, then they want another 10 feet or 20 feet and quit drilling, which makes sense, you know, but where irrigation wells, once they hit water, a lot of them are going to shale now, you know what I mean? And so, I think it's safe to say if we caught a sample out of an irrigation well the very first time it turned on, it would probably be the highest of that year. And if we got it at the very last time, it'd probably be the lowest. And I don't know that it'd be a tremendous range, but there has been some studies done where they were grabbing samples every day or every couple hours even over the season. And there is it normally is a little bit higher right at the beginning of the season, just because them wells haven't pumped for 7 months, you know what I mean, or 8 months.
So you're typically taking those samples in June?
So well, most of our irrigation around here doesn't start till late June. I mean, some typically. And so we usually start grabbing them in mid, after they've run about, so when you say they've run a month, they've probably made 4 circles, you know what I mean? They make about a circle a week usually. So we come out, and after they've made about 4 circles, we'll start taking samples, or after they've run about a month, we'll start taking samples. Because we figure that's giving us a more representative sample of what's actually in the aquifer. So, yes,
Are
ma'am.
sand points any safer than a domestic well, or
No.
give you the same results?
So as you get in the eastern part of our district, there is more sand points, or up in the sand hills, you know, I don't know if, so a sand point's just something you can actually, I've seen people shove them in the ground with a loader bucket, you know what I mean, and put a pump in them and start pumping water. In the sand hills, I think a lot of windmills used to be that way. The problem with the sand point, it's not sealed around that sand point, so when they put in a well, they have to put a grout seal on the outside so nothing can kind of come into that well until, except for where the screen is on the bottom. And where a sand point, you don't have that, so you're actually kind of, and I'm not running sand points down, they work great where you, for cattle, you know what I mean, for water and livestock and stuff, but they kind of leave a conduit for bacteria or whatever to get down along that casing into that well. So I would say that they are probably more likely to have a bacteria issue, most likely. I'm not gonna say that you'll have more or less nitrate because of that, because that depends on what's in the water, not necessarily, but you could have, chances are more of a bacteria issue with a sand point. Yes, sir.
Can nitrate be filtered out of drinking water?
It can, through the reverse osmosis process, yeah, it can be filtered out. And there is a state program right now that Costshare is on reverse osmosis. If you have, oh, I should have brought some of that information with me. I never thought of it till just now. The Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy actually has a Costshare program where if you get a lab result over 10 parts per million, you can fill out the paperwork and send to them, and they will Costshare on a reverse osmosis. And if you get on their website, that information's on their website, and the application forms are on their website as well.
Whose website?
It would be NDEE, Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, NDEE. They just changed their name about a year or 2 ago from NDEQ, Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality, so I still am used to that. I have to stop about the NDE, the NEEDY.
And that's only on domestic wells?
That is only on domestic wells, that's correct, yes. Yep.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Going back to the number of wells sampled. Do all private wells that are tested, through Ward Labs or other local labs, is that information available to you?
No, that's private information.
And can you, I suspect anyone with a domestic well, not anyone, but a large percentage would be happy to give you that information if there was a release form that you submitted when you took your sample into the laboratories. And is that something that could benefit for you?
Yeah, we could look at, we could ask the labs if they'd be willing to allow producers, or allow private well owners to sign that release to us if they wanted to.
Yeah, I think I just took a sample in a couple of weeks ago, and it would have been just so easy to say, sure, they can have the information.
We'll explore that a little further.
Okay.
Yeah, no, but it is, right now it's private information, and that goes back to that private landowner, and that's all. And even our soil samples and our water samples that we get from Ward Lab, we get them through the producer, you know what I mean? They send them to Ward, or Ward will send them to us if the producer tells them to, you know what I mean? And I shouldn't say we got Midwest labs, we got, you know what I mean? There's numerous labs that are used, but yeah, yep, so, yes, sir.
Could you comment on the attitude or the feelings of your board and the producers in this district on nitrates in water? Is this something that they laugh at, or they take seriously, or they think is, you know, an NRD conspiracy of some kind?
I haven't heard the conspiracy theory on it yet, I guess, but, my board does take it very serious. So when I say the 4,600 crop report forms that we get a year, if we don't get one in on a field, we file a cease and desist, and they can't irrigate that field till it comes to us. And we've had people in the last couple of years fined up to $10,000 for irrigating without supplying us the information we require. Our board enforces their rules. So our board takes it very serious. And they've done that, like I say, for the last 40 years almost. So, yeah. I would have to say our board takes our groundwater quality and quantity programs very serious. So, I don't know that I can speak to the producers. I think it's just like anything else. I think you have, part of them that take it very serious and part of them that probably don't, you know what I mean? But that's true with everything, you know.
I'm just trying to, in my own mind, try and separate, you know, coffee shop,
Oh, sure.
you know, information from you or the university or places like that, you know, saying, well, this is a long hand of the government reaching into our business. They have no right to look at, or, you know, the idea of any illness associated with nitrates in the water is just hearsay.
Yeah, I think you need to have probably the med center come out and do a presentation on that type of thing.
Oh.
I think they, some of the presentations we've seen them put on over the last year or two, are pretty scary, to be quite honest with you. So I'm not speaking for or against the med center. You know what I mean? We're very happy to see the information they put out, you know what I mean? And if it can help us go the next step and make sure people are testing their wells, or let them know what health effects drinking contaminated water could have, we want people to know that. We want people to test their wells and be drinking clean water, so.
And one question on using paunch manure. There's a number of plants in the area, and I'm talking about one at Gibbon in particular. Our neighbor uses the paunch manure. He has a contract to haul all of that, and that's 12 months out of the year. But it's a great eagle attractant.
I'll bet it is. That is managed by NDEE, to be quite honest with you. We don't have much to do with that, but I know there's certain regulations they would have to follow, you know what I mean? And I would assume they're being inspected on a regular basis, but I don't know enough to make an intelligent answer for you, to be quite honest with you. And I know there's.
It comes to a fair amount of nitrogen.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah.
On a 12-month basis, because the plant runs every day.
So are they using that to make a product that they're applying to?
They basically top dress with paunch manure.
Yeah, okay. Over multiple acres, I guess,
Yeah.
or many acres, yeah, yep. So, yeah, like I say, there would be some livestock waste rules, I'm guessing, that they would have, I'm not guessing, I know that they would have to follow and through the county and through the state on them types of issues.
And how important have your well decommissioning efforts been in terms of, you know, changing the outlook or changing people's attitudes toward nitrate pollution?
I don't know if it's changed people's attitudes necessarily, but we do abandon a lot of wells, you know what I mean? Anytime we do a replacement well, we require the old well to be abandoned, you know what I mean? And we do retire some acres to put water back to the Platte. I never touched on endangered species and the Platte River program and all that stuff we work with as well, but yeah, we require them wells to be abandoned. We cost share on abandoned wells, so, and if they're not, when I say abandoned, that doesn't mean capped, it means filled in, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually, you can put a watertight seal on them and keep them wells too. If if you just have an irrigation well that you're not gonna use, but you think you're gonna use at a later date, you can legally go out and put a watertight seal on it and register it that way, you know what I mean? That, so you know it's there, but it's not being used.
What does it cost the district on the average to decommission a well?
It's not that expensive. I would say, I haven't even seen one in a while. I would say less than $3,500. Yeah. It's not terribly expensive to decommission a well. And the state has a well decommissioning program where they actually reimburse us for some of that. As an NRD, if we budget over $10,000 a year to abandon wells, they will reimburse us a portion of that cost. So the state does encourage well abandonment as well.
And what do you see in your district on land use practices that would help prevent nitrogen or nitrate infiltration into the groundwater, into the soil? In other words, buffer strips and things like that.
Sure.
Is that something that most people don't even want to bother to do?
I think we have more and more people slowly adopting them types of practices. It was kind of like the no-till, you know what I mean? We have a tremendous amount of no-till and minimum till in our district now. We still have some conventional till, but not a tremendous amount. That helps quite a bit. We do have some buffer strip program. There is a buffer strip program through the state as well that'll cost share and help pay for buffer strips. That all helps. We're a corn soybean rotation. I mean, we really are. We're kind of a corn soybean rotation, to be quite honest with you. But I mean, we do have some alfalfa, quite a bit of alfalfa clear in the western part of our district in that Cozad and Gothenburg area. I think the one thing moving forward, I talked a little bit about kimmigation, and we've been working with our on-farm research guy and the university for a number of years on kimmigation trials and the timing of nutrients. And just last year there was a new company that come out that we actually started cost sharing on doing it this year. You have to kimmigate to participate, but there's a program where they're using satellites to sense the greenness of your crop and giving you a prescription of when you should apply nitrogen and how much. And I really think that's where we're headed. I think that's gonna be very, very helpful. We got a handful of our guys that we were doing on-farm research with that are already doing it. But Sentinel Fertigation is the name of the company. It's a grad student from the university that started the company last year. We had worked with him and the university for a number of years, and we were using drones, and the problem with drones is it doesn't work on a windy day. It doesn't get the color right on a cloudy day, and you know what I mean. And you can only fly so many fields a day, and so getting that converted in the last couple of years to where we can use satellites to get that greenness. All of a sudden, he can get aerial photos of your field. I mean, from 5 to 7 or 8 or 9 times a week. So that it's kind of a game changer. So yeah, so that's something new that we just started cost sharing on last year. And we're kind of hoping that kind of takes off, because it is spoon feeding your crop. He's asking you to put on way less up front. I think what he found out last year in some of his research trials, that a lot of people were putting on almost everything they needed before they even planted or went with planting. And so I think he's kind of advertising that he can save about 40 pounds per acre. I think on some they've saved up to 100 even. So.
Well, the producers that are using right now, or have this past year used that type of system, are these your big producers? Are these the mid-level producer? Or is this just the quote tree hugger producer
no,
that
I-
does want to cut back on.
I would say it's a little of both. I mean, when we do projects like that, kind of our mid-level producers probably, you know what I mean? And some of our bigger ones, and some of our smaller ones too. I mean, we work with guys with one pivot up to 20 or 30, you know what I mean? So, yeah. It's just the person, you know what I mean? And yeah. But I think as we move forward in the future, that program is I hope that takes off. I think that the technology involved with that is something we've been looking for years to help address our nitrate problem, so. And with the cost of nitrate, or with the cost of fertilizer right now, that's probably helpful too. Helpful to get his program up off the ground, you know what I mean? It's, yeah, sure. If you can save 40 to 100 pounds per acre and you're paying 80 cents to $1 a pound, you know what I mean? It starts adding up pretty quick, so. Yes, ma'am.
With the phase 4, you said at some point when you were describing it, that they can still do what they want even when you suggest. Is there a point when you tell them, they're not
So,
allowed to keep
our
over-fertilizing?
our phase 4 is that level, and no, I don't know that anyone has ever done that in the state. We are a very ag-friendly state, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a fact of life. And I do think that is a direction we're going. In phase 4, we have the ability to require them to only put on a UNL recommended amount or a Central Platte recommended route. We do have that ability in phase 4.
Is that counting like all of the other credits and stuff?
Yes.
Not just what they're putting on?
Yes, yep. Yeah, we never look at just applied, we look at the total available, yep.
Yeah, because, just because one person thinks it's best doesn't mean they should get to destroy the water quality for everyone.
Yeah. Yep. So, yes, ma'am.
I'll come back with another drinking water question. We talked about testing individual wells. We know that Hastings has had to do a very expensive,
Yes.
change in their water. I understand Gibbon has also. How many of the cities in that Central Platte NRD have had to modify their water sources because of nitrate levels?
You know, I don't know the exact number of that, but I would guess we've had 3 or 4 that have had to.
Only 3 or 4?
That I'm aware, there could be more. And what you have to remember too is in a municipality system, they have multiple wells. So if they have one well that starts getting into the higher nitrates, they can still pump that well, they just slow it down. They're blending that water. So, I mean, that's what Hastings, I mean, that's what a lot of the municipalities do, and that's fine. I mean, it's about what's coming out of your tap, you know what I mean? So, where a domestic well, you don't have that option. You have one well and you have what's in your well. Where in a municipal system with multiple wells, sometimes that buys them time to find a place to put a better well, you know what I mean, or a new well, or it allows them to continue using that well maybe just at a lower capacity. Yeah.
What are the other, well, Gibbon we know has had a problem. What are the other cities in Central Platte that have had a problem?
The only other one I can think, I think Central City, I think, has had some issues as well, or maybe they're having some issues right now.
My aunt told me.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not saying there's not others, I'm just, sometimes we're not aware of them either, to the municipalities, you know what I mean? Cause they're doing their sampling and send it to the state and they're getting results back and they may be changing up how they pump their water.
Or would they'd be knocking on
We're
your
not aware
door
of
as
it.
soon as they found they had a problem.
Yeah, so.
I looked up online the reverse osmosis. It says that it takes out 83 to 92% of nitrates
Yep.
out of your water. So, I mean, it's kind of expensive, but it'd be worth it.
Yeah, and if you have real high nitrates, it may not take them all out. I mean, that's, yeah.
But, better than tap water.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still cheaper than buying bottled water.
Yes, and, a lot of the
Upfront
regulations on
cost.
bottled water, they're not, you're really not any better
Yeah.
off than drinking stuff.